All right, looks like we are good to go this morning. Well, welcome, good morning, and happy to have you back. Some of you will be new to day 2 of our conference, and some of you are coming back. Some may, maybe not all of you know that I'm Ruth York, the Executive Director of the Idaho Federation of Families, or IFF as we frequently go by. We're bringing you this parent education conference in partnership with the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, and specifically the Division of Behavioral Health. At IFF, we focus on parent education, parent support, and parent advocacy. And through this conference, we hope we are touching on all of these areas in some way. Today's topic should make for an interesting day. First, we are going to hear about how you can use your own story to create change. From there, we will focus on the special education system and how parent voice can be used in that system. And this afternoon, we will end with an early afternoon session. There's the chance to learn why complaining is good and how to do it effectively. I have forgotten to remind people that there is a rate this session button in Whova that you can access for each session. And we would very much like you to do that post-session. And if I did not say this yesterday, so if you haven't rated yesterday's sessions and would be willing to go back and do that, that would be great. So without further ado, starting us off this morning is Angela Lindig, the Executive Director of Idaho Parents Unlimited, or IPUL as they are known. Angela's personal experience with children with disabilities and special healthcare needs has given her a passion for helping others develop strong and effective advocacy skills on behalf of their children and all children throughout Idaho. Angela and the staff at IPUL are who we at IFF contact when we are contacted about a family's educational concern for their child. But IPUL does a lot more than just address educational needs. They are a really important resource for families who have children with physical and developmental disabilities and medically fragile children. Angela will be talking to us about how we can use our personal stories to create change in various child serving systems. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will let you inspire us from here. And I know you have a presentation to share.
Thank you so much. Yes, thanks, Ruth. This is great. So good morning, everyone. I am going to share my screen in just a second. I want to just let people know, in case you don't know who Idaho Parents Unlimited is, our contact information will be on the slides as well. But a little preface behind this actual PowerPoint that I'm going to talk through. So Idaho Parents Unlimited is we are the Parent Training and Information Center and the Family to Family Health Information Center here in Idaho. We work with families statewide, children who have disabilities and special health care needs from birth to adulthood. And if there is a system, a topic, any system that a family might be touching, we will be a resource and help families navigate whatever those systems are. And that includes special education, it includes community-based health resources, et cetera. And everything we do is always at no cost to families as well. So one of the things that we're doing is we have many partnerships. Obviously, we partner a lot with the Federation and pleased to be able to do the work together around children's mental health and the needs of families. But one of our other partnerships currently is with Idaho Voices for Children and the First Steps Alliance. And we've been providing advocacy trainings all over the state to help families really have the tools to advocate on behalf of systems and early childhood systems in particular. And so you're going to see some references to that in these slides, but at the same time, this advocacy training really is good for any issue a family might be facing. So it can be used for your personal stories, for advocating on behalf of your child in particular, but it really helps you to see how to get involved in bigger systems change. And I'll sprinkle in my fair share of stories with only an hour to get through this, but let me share my screen and we'll get started with it right away. Let's see here. Where are you, PowerPoint? You are up and now you're missing. So let's just go here real quick. Here we go. Let's say from the beginning and let's go ahead and do the slideshow. There we go. Thanks. Okay, so that's our just to show the partnership there between us and the First Steps Alliance, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so here's essentially what we're going to go through. We're going to talk about what advocacy is, why changing systems is important. I know you've already heard some of this about the basics from the Idaho legislature, but it's a nice review to have some of the contact information and really how our the legislative process works, in case you missed some of that from the keynote presentation previously, and then how to engage with elected officials, and then really how the use of your personal story is impactful. So first things first, what's an advocate? The term advocate, we like to, when we do this in person, we really like to ask people what comes to mind when you think of an advocate. Essentially, it's somebody who's standing up for an issue or for others, right? You're advocating on behalf of something. Sometimes we might not really realize that we're advocating for something. If we're asked to provide information or to share our story, we might not know that that is a form of advocacy, but that is exactly what that is. So also, the term advocate can take on a lot of different meanings for people. I don't know if it's because they all start with ADV, but sometimes it's viewed as adversarial. I know Ruth mentioned a little while ago that sometimes, would you say complaining might be okay? There is a time and a place for various types of advocacy, and it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be adversarial. You can be effective advocacy skills are best in our opinion here at Idaho Parents Unlimited. And so getting these tools to be effective, there are plenty of ways to be very ineffective in advocacy, and that's what we hope to help families avoid. All right, so these are some of the key characteristics of an effective advocate. So we know our stuff, right? You've got your knowledge, you know what you're talking about. You're organized, you have your information exactly where you need it, and you know how to access it. An effective advocate also is a good listener. So they listen because they need to know what to ask questions about. So an effective advocate is respectful and works with others and also shares their own experiences. So then there's systems advocacy. So when we're advocating on behalf of our own children, that's one thing. You know, if I'm going into school and there are certain things that I want to see on my child's individualized education program, and maybe the school, maybe the team is not necessarily agreeing, and I have data and I can show exactly why maybe I believe my child needs a service, then I'm advocating just on behalf of my own child. Systems advocacy is the big picture. It's changing policies, laws, or rules or regulations about how services are provided, perhaps. In Idaho, in our state, when we're talking about systems advocacy, frequently we're talking about legislative advocacy. We'll talk about other types, but for the purpose here, there's a heavy focus on the legislative focus, as opposed to just in your community or in your school. So systems advocacy is super important for all of the reasons on the screen. It improves laws, and it also removes barriers, and it impacts more people. And to be quite honest, really good advocacy efforts typically come from parents. We see big system change usually start at a parent level, where parents are the ones that know where services can be changed or improved. And we oftentimes think that maybe we don't have a voice, but we do, and collectively we have a bigger voice to impact those systems. This is just the removing of systemic barriers, and I really love this slide. The first one you're looking at, it says everybody's being treated equally. So you have the three kids standing on boxes to be able to see over a fence to see the baseball game, and they're being treated equally because they're all on the equal sized box. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that it's equitable, because the shortest individual, even though they're on a box, still can't see over the fence. And then the second one, they're being treated equitably. Everybody can now see over the fence because they've got a box that, or two boxes that raise them up to where they can see. The systemic barrier is removed in the third slide, in that there's no boxes necessary if you have a fence that everybody can see through. I just really like that visual there. All right, we talked about the systems advocacy, and I'm going to try to talk somewhat fast so that I can get through it in the hour that we have. So forgive me if I'm speaking a little too quickly. So laws, rules, and policies. And then here we're going to talk about the basics of the Idaho legislature real quick. Okay, so this is the territory. This is a big text heavy slide, but this is maybe important to know for people that aren't familiar with the legislature. But the legislature is the one that the body that we go through for any big systems change that requires a change in Idaho rule, or a change in the statute, laws, or et cetera. The legislature is not necessarily who you go through when policies are being changed. So if it doesn't impact law or statute or rule, then there's another, different people would be involved, or different systems would be involved other than the legislature. But in Idaho, we have our governor and our lieutenant governor. They each serve 4-year terms with no term limits. The legislature is comprised of the following: 105 members, 35 districts. There are 35 senators, 70 representatives, and they all serve 2-year terms, but we don't have term limits. The legislature meets usually beginning in January until around mid-March. We've seen the legislature go as on into May. In fact, they like to get their work done by mid-March and go home. They are our legislature is a they typically have jobs in their own communities. They work full-time, and they convene just in those first couple of months. A lot of work gets done, however, beyond the legislative session, and it's important that you know how to find your particular legislators, so that you might want to communicate with them outside of the legislative session in the summer months, especially if you know there's something maybe that's going to be coming in the following session, or if you want to be bringing something to the following session. You've started to make some of those connections and tell your story ahead of time, so that by the time perhaps it gets a potential bill in front of them by January or February, they've already been made aware of it and they know who you are, in fact. So just remember, they live in your own communities and you have access to them as you need to. You can email, you can write them, you can set up meetings, et cetera. And I'll talk a little further about that. All right, so this is just a visual of what I just explained, but those are the districts. That's and all of this map, all of these are online. Okay, so I don't need to get too far into the policy process, but when your voice will be heard, this part is important. There are, let's say there's a rule change happening through the Department of Health and Welfare. They will typically provide, that information usually comes out in the summer, with public hearings taking place in the fall ahead of the legislative session. Before then, that goes to the committee hearings where people can go in and comment on bills or rule changes at those actual committee hearings. And so there are lots of opportunities that you can potentially have to share your story or talk about an issue, whether it be in an actual public comment or testimony at the legislature, or just in those meetings one-on-one with staff or the legislators themselves. Okay, this is another one of those really busy slides, but this one actually just shows, I'll age myself and say, you know, how a bill becomes a law. We all know the song of how built on Capitol Hill, right? Some of us know that song from when we were kids on Saturday cartoons. Anyways, but this is how it goes. How a bill starts out as a routing slip. It goes to a committee for the first reading. Once the House committee hears it, that's when you've got your public testimony. The committee will vote on it. It'll go to the House for second and third readings. Then it also goes then to the Senate. And it can start in the Senate and go to the House, but this is just an example. And then that would go to the Senate committee. So if this was through health and welfare, a children's mental health issue being dealt with, for instance, it would go through the House Health and Welfare Committee, and then it would go through the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and they would get the same information about the bill, any changes that have been made, and then ultimately it goes to the full floor for the vote, and then it gets to the governor, who can choose to sign something into law or to veto it or not sign it. So that's just the very basics. Okay. So these are some of the people that we can talk to about making things better. Beyond, outside of the legislature, obviously we've talked about that, but then there are other people that we want to potentially connect with to tell our stories when we want to see something get better, to get buy-in from different folks. So that might be your city council, it could be school leaders, it could be your personal networks or other boards, school boards, right? You might have an issue within your school district where you want to talk to your school board. There are a lot of different folks to know who's who and who you should be talking to. And I bring this up too because a lot of times we're talking to the wrong people. Totally not related to children's mental health, but some of my background, for instance, I worked many years ago to create Idaho's first universally accessible playground, which is the Adventure Island Playground inside Meridian Settlers Park. And when I started that project, I didn't know I was starting a project. I was really just talking about how great that would be, because I am a parent of kids with and without disabilities. And so I wanted a playground where my whole family could play together. And I wanted this obviously for systems reasons. It wasn't just about me and my children, it was about everybody, you know, and creating an inclusive community. I went to a meeting that I had heard about that was it was a listening session essentially on the city's parks. And so I had gone to this meeting to talk about a universal design and maybe how we could create something like this. And the person that was facilitating the meeting told me that I was trying to sell a product because I brought some information on some specific playground equipment, which I wasn't trying to sell a product because I didn't have a product to sell. I was just a mom in, you know, wanting something better for my kids. So he was the wrong person for me to be talking to about the issue or the concerns that I had. And I didn't know he was the wrong person. And it took me a long time to figure out that he was a consultant that the city had hired. And fortunately, I had enough people that I had talked about this concept to that started to move me into, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so, you need to talk to this person. Okay, so-and-so over here is really passionate about parks too. So we eventually formed a committee and were able to essentially put together enough of the right people to move the project forward, and then it came into fruition and it's out there today. So, and it's a model. So sometimes when we talk about making things better, it's not because something's really wrong. We're improving systems that or creating services or systems that maybe just don't currently exist. So we want to be thinking in those terms as well. And I had a story to tell. So we'll get to there. So here we go. And these are ways to use your personal story. This is when it talks about the effectiveness of your story to the more effective, easier to more difficult. So it's at the bottom, we've got calling, writing letters or emails, personal meetings, and then legislative testimony or speaking at public hearings. And yes, the more terrifying experiences are generally more effective, but they can be really intimidating and difficult. I would go so far personally as to say that emailing or writing letters has become easier than even calling. I would flip those two personally. We're in an email world these days. So, but nevertheless, if you are able to speak at a public hearing or provide your testimony, or even at that personal meeting space, it goes a lot further than even sending an email. An email or a call is great if that's what you can do. But these other things, if you're able to provide your personal stories on a larger scale, it goes a long way. The legislature in Idaho wants to hear from their constituents. They really do want to hear the stories. They can get data from agency staff, they can get numbers, and they can, those of us who worked in these positions too, we're not going to be even as effective as when a parent comes in and has a personal story to tell. So know that your voice is important. And if you've got something that's impacting you and your family, chances are you're not alone, and they need to hear that. All right, so here are some ways that you can contact your elected officials, and that just sort of reiterates what we just talked about. With the exception of finding on social media, our legislature in Idaho is really accessible, to be quite honest. I think we're very fortunate that way. I always say Idaho's a small town, and we really are. Many of our legislators are there on Facebook. They have their social media accounts. They have Instagram. Many of them are on Twitter. I'm Facebook friends with a number of them, and it really helps to sometimes put your face and your name out there, so that when you do make contact with them, if they're on their Facebook or their social media accounts, and they might recognize you, they might recognize your name, they might recognize some of your story that maybe you're sharing on your personal page. So it's just really great that they are so easily accessible, and getting a meeting with your legislator is not difficult at all. So it's less intimidating that way too, I think. Okay, and this is just a screenshot and a link to the legislature to find your legislators. So, okay. So now we're talking about tips for talking with our elected officials. So it is important that we keep things, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but having goals for what you want to get out of the meeting, or when you're talking with them, how we say what we want is really important, as not just what we want. So our presentation and how we present ourselves and how we approach these conversations is very, very important. And we'll talk about the offering solutions in just a second. Okay, so this is important too. So you're unlikely to agree on every issue. So even if you are just thrilled with whoever your legislator is, they might not be aware of the issue that you have, and they might have a different perspective on it. While we said in the very beginning that it's important to be really knowledgeable and to know your stuff, you're not expected to know everything, and honestly, neither are they. So remember, there's a lot of issues coming to the legislature that they're dealing with in the session in 2 to 3 months time period. And there's a lot of people wanting to advocate for their particular issue. They don't know everything. And so I think that's where that being really respectful about each other's perspectives is important, and be willing to get them more information if they need it in a respectful manner. So we always say thank you, no matter what. We always thank people for their time and for being willing to listen to our issue, even if they're not the right person, if they can help direct you to somebody who is the right person. So it's just great to always say thank you. And then send a follow-up note. Always send a follow-up note after you've met with somebody, either over the phone or in person, because that just only solidifies that they'll remember you and your issue. So, and then yes, get involved. Okay, so this is never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. It's the only thing that does, and that's the truth. That's what I said. So many things that we see big differences in in this in our country and in our state have stemmed from a parent need, and parents bringing other people together that are committed to the change. It makes the difference. Okay, so now we are going to talk about the power of a personal story. So this is such a great proverb. It says, tell me a fact and I'll learn, tell me a truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. It's so true that when we tell stories, they're so impactful. So much more than the data that I talked about earlier, you know, the numbers and the data. We'll throw things around like, oh, I think I heard something like 40% of kids have this and this and this. And you might not remember any of that, but if somebody comes in and tells you a really impactful story about like I did with the playground, you know, I can tell you I had 2 kids at the time. I have 3 today, but at that time I had 2. My oldest daughter has a significant developmental disability. She didn't take her first steps till she was a month before her 5th birthday. My son, bypassed her developmentally within the first year of his life. And we wanted a place where where they could grow and enjoy and recreate together. And at the time, my oldest daughter, she went to therapy and my son went to parks. And so that was the beginning of our story, you know, and I think that chances are you're going to remember that far more than you're going to remember how many children have disabilities that can't access parks, right? So it's the visual that you get of hearing, you know, a child with a disability and a brother without a disability, and this family trying to navigate just normal play and recreation. You'll remember that a bit more, I think. So they're powerful. So personal stories hold our attention. They trigger emotions and feelings. We remember them, and they absolutely influence others. So don't be afraid to share your story. Know how much of your story to share, however. So maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So personal story tips. Time is limited. This is really important. And then choose one thing to talk about. Keep sentences short. Use words, not acronyms. So time is limited. When you are providing testimony at the legislature, depending on the hearing, if it's a topic where there are going to be a lot of people providing testimony, they will give you 3 minutes. You will have 3 minutes, and sometimes there's even a timer, and they will cut you off, in fact. So learning how to tell your story in 3 minutes is challenging, to be clear, especially if it's a very long story. If you've got something that you've been dealing with for several years, for many years, scaling that down and condensing it is challenging, because you're going to have so many things that they have to know, right? Oh my gosh, I have to be able to tell them this part. That's hard. So choosing just the one thing to talk about is where you can really scale that back. So when it comes to school issues that we hear from families in our office all the time, we will have families send these email. They'll share with us maybe an email they sent to their school, or just in what they're telling us, that could go 2-3 pages long. They'll start, you know, my kid was in 2nd grade and then this happened to them, and then in 4th grade this happened, and by now, you know, the kid's in a sophomore in high school, and it's too much, and you're going to lose people. And so you have, even though you want people to have that history and you want them to understand how you got where you are today, it's too much for when telling your story for the purpose of advocacy. So choose the one thing to talk about. Keep your sentences short. People don't want to try to process really long sentences, so the shorter the better. And then always words, not acronyms. In this world of early childhood, special education, healthcare, mental health, we are always speaking in not only acronyms, but jargon. There's so much jargon. And when you're talking to a legislator, about these issues, and they might not have any personal experiences with any of it, those acronyms and that jargon is just they're gonna glaze over. They're not gonna, you'll lose them pretty quick. And nobody wants to feel like they don't know something either. So when you speak in acronyms or jargon, they might not want to ask what that means, and then that's kind of a turnoff. If I don't know what that meant, and I wasn't going to ask because there were other people in the room. I don't want to feel silly. So just remember that not everybody speaks the language we're speaking. Okay, so when we're in person, we actually like to craft our personal stories. So I would invite you all to take some notes on this area, using your own personal stories, maybe bullet point these things. You don't have to say, who are you, and write all this out. You'll have a copy of this. But if you are thinking about how to craft your own story, these are the things you might lay out. So in the beginning, what we do with our storytelling when we do this in person is we start out with a sheet of paper and we write. You can make it as long as you want, as big as you want. You can tell that whole 3-page story. You can start from 2nd grade and get to your sophomore year in high school. You do it the way you want to do it. It's an outline, but we start with the beginning, okay? So we start with, who are you? So are you telling who you are? This says, who are you providing care for? So that's if you were, we actually had done this recently with a caregivers conference. So that's why that's in there. But in this case, we would say, what is the issue, right? So it could be who tell us about your child, if that's what you're talking about. But starting out with, who are you? What is the issue? And what's working? This is probably the hardest part to do, because we want to start with everything that's not working. You don't. You want to start with what is working. So if it's in mental health, let's say your child is receiving certain services, certain treatments, interventions, or whatever the case might be, that are working, you would highlight those, right? So here's my child, this is me, this is where I live. It is important to tell where you live too, because if it is a legislative issue, they want to know that you're writing to your particular legislator. They appreciate knowing, oh, this person lives in my community. This is good. This is my constituent. If it's to a committee, on the other hand, that's fine too. They might not be your legislator, but it still helps them to know from where around the state are we hearing about these issues. Is this a rural issue? Is this something that we're seeing in the bigger communities as well? Is this a statewide issue? Is this something that's happening only in in the Boise area? And so it helps them to determine, is there a system that needs to be changed? Is this systemic? Is this something that's affecting lots of people or just a handful of people? Do I need to do something about it? So we start with what's working, okay? Going back to the playground, I can tell you what was working. If I was telling my story, what worked is that we have a vibrant park system in the Boise Meridian area, right? There's beautiful parks, lots of green space, clean air, clean, we live in a lovely, beautiful community. So, and there are lots of good playgrounds for families. So that was my story of what was working. The middle, this is the fun part. This is where you get to put in the problem, right? So here's what's not working. So here's the big but. They're not accessible for me, right? For my family. These are great parks. We have all this green space. My son has a blast. He runs, he plays. But what's not working is that they're not accessible for my daughter. So in whatever the issue might be for children's mental health, for your situation, what's not working? We don't have access to a CBRS worker. We don't have access to community services. There's no good residential treatment facilities. There's nothing. These are the things that we don't have, and that aren't working. My child may have to go out of state to receive services. These are These are where this is the part where you can define the problem. And again, give examples, write out as much as you want, craft your story, just write it all out, everything and anything. But then, really important, what are the solutions? What do you think would be helpful for this? You might not have a solution, right? So, and this is important because a lot of times we feel like we don't want it to just be a vent session. You don't want to just go in and say, you know, this is all wrong and bad, and please, we want you to do something about it, but you're not giving any options. If you don't know of any options, and it is just all a big troublesome issue, you can say, I don't have an answer for this, but I'm hoping we can brainstorm. I'm hoping that maybe we could put together a committee. Maybe we could put together a group of people, focus groups, so that we can try to come up with solutions together. We all can agree that it's not working, and we see why, you know, what's not working about it, but it will take us together to come up with solutions. But if you do have some ideas for solutions, that is extremely helpful to put in this section of your story. And then the end. So this is where we find out if, say thank you, and then thanks for your time, thanks for reading, thanks for hearing, thanks for listening, etc. Will they agree to help try to solve the problem? What information do they need? And are they not the right person? And if, or are they unwilling? If they're unwilling and they're no, I can't do anything about that. That's the way this is. Just say thank you and move along, and perhaps look for another strategy. If they are not the right person, then hopefully they will say that, right? I can't help with this because it's not in my scope, or this isn't something that I'm familiar with. Can they then refer you to somebody who could be the right person? So don't be afraid to ask that question. If you're not able to do this, do you have a suggestion of who I should be talking to, or who else I should be talking to? And then that's all still in your letter, you know, or in your testimony. All of these things come into your writing your story. Then we put it all together. So when you share your personal story, so now what we typically will do is we'll take that beginning, that middle, and that end, and we ask you to take your 3 to 5 sentences from each of the sections and turn that into what we call the elevator speech. So this is where you can condense it into less than 3 minutes. And if you can get it down to 30 seconds to at least pique somebody's interest, then that's even better. So that's why it's called the elevator speech. So if you were on the elevator with somebody and you were trying to go up, you know, to the 10th floor, and that's all the time you've got, can you pique their interest, get their attention, and share enough of your story in that amount of time to then potentially move to the next steps in solving the problems or changing systems. So, but if you can take those 3 to 5 sentences from each, the beginning, the middle, of the end, and really hone in on what's most important for you that others need to know, that's how you can condense it down to where you can share it in a legislative hearing or other public hearing where you can provide testimony. Once you've done that, then you review it and you take a look at it and you say, whose experience? When you look at this, are you describing your experience? Did you provide enough background? Are there specific points? Did you give good examples? And again, you're doing all of this within 3 minutes. Did you provide the suggestion for the solution? Is the story convincing? Will they remember it? Will it be remembered? So those are just sort of your checklist to make sure those components are all there. If you take a look back and you find that you're missing some of these things, and it tends to be still, again, more of a complaining letter, or I'm not going to say don't have emotion, because your emotion really does make a difference. I mean, obviously we're very emotional when it comes to our kids and the things that we know that they need. But if it's an anger-filled testimony, consider whether or not that's going to be effective for advocacy. It might be. It depends on the issue. It might not be, and you could lose people. So double check yourself on those kinds of things. Then practice telling your story. You can, if you can share your story with a friend and get a critique from some other people before you go and give testimony, that's helpful. The trusted friends will tell you the truth on whether or not, well, maybe you should think about this, or did you want, or maybe they're going to remember something that you have told them that you specifically want that maybe you forgot to include. So definitely practice with a friend if possible, or share it, or send it in written format to some trusted people to review. Be yourself. Just your story is yours. It's nobody's truth but yours. Even if it's similar to a lot of other people's stories and you are collectively working on an issue, your story is still your unique story. Try to remain calm. We talked about the emotions. It's hard. I know giving testimony at the legislature it's nerve-wracking, honestly. I've done it. I mean, some people are great at it. I've done it, and I can speak in front of hundreds of people at conferences. I can do this. I can do public speaking all day long. It's what I've done for many, many years. Testimony at the legislature it can be very intimidating. There's a protocol, there's the 3 minutes, there's how to speak to the legislator through the chair, and using all the right terminology. It can be very intimidating, and even those of us who do all sorts of public speaking can get up there and be very nervous. So it's okay to be nervous, to be honest. Just try to keep yourself calm, and then have somebody supportive possibly going with you if you're going to be providing that testimony. And just remember, again, it's your truth. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Okay. So these are just some of the, this is for those who might be interested in getting involved in advocacy efforts for early childhood with our First Steps Alliance and the Idaho Voices for Children. If you're interested in that, you'll have a copy of this as well. And then the quote, be the change you want to see in the world. Because it's really, again, parents, you are the ones that can make the difference. And then this is just our contact information. And wow, I did get through that quickly. So that'll give us time for Q&A, hopefully. And these are just some of our contacts. I will say there's a Padlet. If you have access to this Padlet, the little QR code right there, that will take you to a number of resources, and including this slide. So you don't have to try to remember a whole bunch of links. Everything is in the Padlet. Ruth?
Hey, wow, thank you so much. That was so much good information. Just taking my own notes.
I have never done that in 45 minutes. I mean, we typically we're doing it together as a team over here at IPOL, and so we tend to bounce off of each other and we take too long. So
that was just perfect. The only question we have thus far, so anybody who wants to ask a question, get it in quick, is can we share these slides? And Angela, I assume it will be okay with you for us to post this on our website afterward.
Yes.
We post all conference sessions typically, so just for the whole group to know that. Okay, so Angela, if you'll send those directly to us,
yes.
That would be awesome.
I can do that.
Okay.
What questions would anybody have about a specific story or something that maybe I didn't touch on? Is there, I know relating this back to the Adventure Island Playground isn't necessarily mental health related, but a story is a story.
Yeah.
Right. I know I'll give an example from last year. So Ruth, you remember last year, we all worked, again, starts with a parent. We worked to create a change in the Children's Mental Health Act. And that required, so that turned into House Bill 233. And just a quick story on how this happened. So The parent came to me and to a couple of other people and said, what do you think about getting legislation for this, changing the Children's Mental Health Act to essentially it provides that parents will not be charged with abandonment or neglect for the sole purpose of seeking treatment for their children, right?
And
So
Angela, I'm going to, sorry, interrupt and just let you know that Laura and Marco, Representative Erickson told this story yesterday. So not everybody was there, but some people are totally dialed into, yep, this sounds like the same thing. So this is a good example.
Yeah, so really what happened was, so Laura had come and asked, do you think that this is possible? And it was like already October. And so when I was saying earlier how important it is to maybe get ahead of the session if you've got an issue. So she says, do you think it'll be possible? And I said, oh my gosh, I don't know. It's already October, but I'm willing to help. We're willing to try. Let's see who we can pull together and see if this is possible. So sure enough, she was able to then get with Representative Erickson and get him to sponsor the bill. And the stories that were told, the testimony that was given by parents, an issue, all done through parent voice, all of it. The testimony was incredibly powerful and people gave their stories, and there were a lot of questions by the various committee members, but the House Health and Welfare Committee approved it, passed it unanimously. The Senate Health and Welfare Committee passed it unanimously. It went to the floor and it passed the whole legislature unanimously. I personally have never seen a bill go through the legislature with no nays. Nobody was against this bill. And it took the powerful voices of parents to make that happen. There's still, obviously, as they mentioned, I'm sure in their story, a lot of work to be done, because just because you pass a bill doesn't mean that it just automatically is sunshine and roses. But parents made that happen. So, and I just think that parents need to know that they can and should tell those stories for systems change.
Yeah, do you see that next question, Angela? You want me to read it to you?
How do you find willing partners who may not have the issue on their radar or in their 1 to 5 year plan? Oh gosh. Go on the periphery. What is important to them? So if you're looking for a specific partner and that's not on their radar, who are their other partners that maybe could potentially make that a topic of priority for them? So, or who else do you have in your sphere that could also connect with them? So, it is all frequently about who you know, but with the playground, I didn't know anybody. I was just sort of being directed to people. So, like I said, one person would say, you should talk to, at the time, Mayor DeVeard was city council member. And somebody said, you should talk to Tammy DeVeard. She's passionate about parks. And I said, I don't know who that is. But I did. And so sometimes it's just other people or getting somebody else to give you the contact. Can you make a contact? Can you do an intro? Can you introduce me to that person? As far as priorities, if it's not in their 1 to 5 year plan, it doesn't mean that they can't work on an issue. It just depends on whether or not it's something that things bubble up and become a priority when we least expect it. So
I agree with that because I think that's when it's not in the plan, is when parent voice can be so effective. A parent story can be so effective because you're bringing an awareness, a deep personal story will bring an awareness to somebody that they've never had. So there was no reason it would be in their 1 to 5 year plan potentially. So you just never know that the 1 to 5 year plan could change.
Absolutely. And I go back to House Bill 233. That wasn't that change in the Children's Mental Health Act wasn't on anybody's radar. I wouldn't have, and I honestly didn't think it was gonna go anywhere, because so often things don't go anywhere for a long time. Things take time, and I'd say probably every legislature, but the Idaho legislature is notoriously slow with some things. And so you'll see bills or topics that we've been working on for years before they finally gain some traction. So yeah, you never know when something is going to be very suddenly obvious to somebody, where it's like, why hadn't we thought about that? So universal design for a playground, that seems pretty basic. Like, why was the Adventure Island playground first? How had that never come up before? So it took a parent voice, and parents who think that you might not think you're anybody. Because I had two little babies. I had a 2 and a 3-year-old at the time that I started that project, and I was a stay-at-home mom. I didn't think I had any leverage or pull, or I felt I'm just mom. So, but you tell your story enough and people start to realize that, hey, that's important. So
I think that's right. And the power of just networking and sharing your story can be so profound, because people, you're just planting seeds and creating awarenesses that don't exist. And so I think sometimes we think, if we have an idea like a playground, we think, oh, well, somebody else would have already thought of that and tried it. It must not be possible. But that's just not true. So often, we just don't think of ourselves as having these great original thoughts. People may have thought that, but when all of us think, oh, I can't do this, or somebody else has already mixed this, nothing happens. So just being out there, telling your story, making your asks is so important. I think you've given us a lot of good information on that.
So much of it too boils down to money, right? Money and policy go hand in hand. And so, being willing to be the town beggar for 9 years, so making the ask to say, can we do this? And can we partner to create this? And here's what we want to do. But also part of the solution was, I'm going to write grants. I'm going to do fundraising. I'm going to, we as a collective grassroots group are going to raise some funds to make this happen. And then the city is going to agree to do all of this. So, there you have to be innovative in your solutions. I'll take another one back to the children's mental health, however. Many, many years ago in 2007, I strongly wanted something like a Katie Beckett Medicaid waiver for children with mental health diagnoses. Because Ruth, as you know, my youngest child has multiple mental health diagnoses, but she didn't have a developmental disability, so she wasn't Medicaid eligible because of income. So I had gone to a group of people at the Department of Health and Welfare and with our state independent living council, and I had done a lot of research, which I talk about in the presentation, tried to get knowledge about what other states had to try to see could we get something like this for children with mental health diagnoses. And I was told that's not going to happen in your daughter's lifetime or childhood, right? But I still believed that it was needed, and I never stopped talking about it. And then 2008 hit, and the recession, and and then there were cuts to Medicaid, and there was no way that this issue was going to get brought forward, and that I was going to somehow get a Katie Beckett program for children's mental health. And we still haven't done that, but it's still something that is really important to me. We got closer with the YES program in that established a higher income threshold for kids to be able to access Medicaid for mental health purposes. But it's still not as far as I feel like it should go. So that's a story I've been telling since 2007, and I'm still telling that story because I still believe there is a need. So if others feel that that's important to them, pull together
Yeah,
and see if that's a system that could be changed or impacted in some way. So
awesome.
one more story. Don't give up. Just don't give up, because you never know. And no, my child's not a child anymore. We got past all of that.
That's for sure.
But there are children today who need services who don't have access to those services because they're not Medicaid eligible. So they're still out there. There's still a good advocacy that can take place. Some parents going to need to jump on that.
Absolutely. And we so
Yeah.
appreciate parents who frequently do this work. Of course, one is always inspired by their own family situation and wants to change their own family situation, but many of the parents we work with are really doing this for the families that are going to come up behind them.
That's right.
Because our children will age out, and in many cases have aged out, but parents are still in the game because they see. And sometimes once your parents age out a bit, I mean, your children age out a bit, you have more time in your life from which to go back and say, boy, that was hard. I hate to think of other families in that struggle now. And it's a great place to apply your parent voice when you have the time and ability.
Absolutely.
Angela, thank you so much. That was a wonderful session. That was a really important session. And I'd like to tell people a couple of things before we break related to this session. And that is that IFF will put out, through our newsletter, you'll be able to see a session on storytelling for parents who would like to come together and start sort of work together through some of this that Angela just showed us exactly. So look at our calendar on our website, and you will see it out there, and we'll try and do some promotion of that. But this session is what inspired us to say it's good timing to do a storytelling workshop again.
That's great.
And that'll just give you the option to come together and actually put pen to paper with us present. And then I just want to say that Angela is a really important partner to me, because at IFF we work so very purely in youth mental health. And Angela's world is bigger and broader in the whole world of disabilities. And there is such important knowledge and expertise there that both IFF and I personally need to draw on. And so we really rely on IPOL for the work that they do and the insights and expertise and collaboration that they can offer us at times. So I just want to give you that shout out and tell you thank you so much. And this session will be posted for people to go back to. Don't forget to rate the session. And what we're going to do next, and Angela's actually going to stay involved with us here. We've got a session coming from the State Department of Education. But they recorded a session that originally and they also hoped they would do live, but it's recorded. It will seem like they're right there talking to you, but they won't be there for Q&A at the end. And Angela is going to be available to us as that session gets to the Q&A piece, and we'll do a live Q&A. So stay tuned for that. The recording will start, I'll introduce it at 11:30. I've seen it. It's a lot of good information. Be very helpful to some families for sure. So again, many thanks, and glad people joined us. Thanks, Angela. People remember IPOL.
Yes. Okay. I will see you then after the next presentation. Thanks.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.